Good day, students, and welcome to your Human and Social Biology class. I am your teacher, Mr. Heron. All right, let's talk for 2 minutes about the syllabus. The syllabus is divided into 5 sections. Section A, which looks at living organisms and the environment. Section B, which speaks to life processes. Section C, which looks at heredity and variation. Section D, which speaks to diseases and its impact on humans, and Section E, which speaks to the impact of health practices and the environment. Now, let's begin with living organisms and the environment. Now, you will remember from your earlier science class that everything around us can be placed into 2 groups, whether it's a living organism or it's a non-living thing. Now, what makes this distinction? What makes a living organism different from a non-living thing? Well, for one, all living organisms must display 7 characteristics. All right? Now let's get right into it. The first characteristic that all living things must display is the ability to intake nutrition or nutrients. And that's the first one. Nutrition. Now, what is nutrition? Nutrition is simply the process of obtaining food, right? Now, when humans eat food, we call this process ingestion, right? So, we're hungry, we get some food, we put it in our mouth, we chew, we swallow. That's called ingestion. And that's how humans obtain food, right? We eat. Now, let's look at plants. How do plants get their nutrition? Well, plants use a process called photosynthesis, where they capture the energy from the sun, along with water and carbon dioxide, and they're able to make simple sugar, glucose, which they later convert to make cellulose or starch, which they store for use at night. Right? So let's recap. What is nutrition? It is simply the process of obtaining food. Oh, so while we're on the topic of obtaining food, why do living organisms need to obtain food? Well, they need food for energy and to repair broken cells or worn out cells or to grow. All right? Now, the next characteristic which all living things must display is the ability to respire or respiration. Now, let's backtrack. You may be tempted to think that respiration is breathing. But the truth is, respiration is the release of energy from the food we have eaten. Yes, it's not just inhaling or exhaling. No. Respiration is the releasing of the energy from the food we have eaten. All right? So on the topic of respiration, it is worthy to note that there are 2 types of respiration. One which involves oxygen, which is aerobic respiration, and anaerobic respiration, which does not include oxygen. All right, so recapping, respiration is simply the process of releasing energy from the food we have eaten. All right, now the next characteristic which all living things must display is growth. Now, what is growth? It's pretty self-explanatory. Growth is a permanent increase in size and mass. All right? So, in simpler terms, growth is when you get bigger in size and heavier. So all living things will grow and increase in size and weight. Now, it's important to note that not all growth can be visibly seen or is visible. Now, when you have damaged cells and you repair those cells or you generate new cells, that's a form of growth. All right? So, in recapping, growth is a permanent increase in size and weight. So, moving right along, the next characteristic which all living things must display is movement, the ability to move. Now, what is movement? Movement is simply a change in position or a change in location. Now, I can move my arm, I can move my leg, or I could move my entire body to a new location. Now, the movement of the entire body from point A to point B is called locomotion, right? So, let's recap. What is movement? It's a change in position. Or I can move my entire body, which is called locomotion. Question, do plants move? Of course they do. However, their movement might be much slower, but think about it. A rose, it opens, it blooms. That's movement. A tree, its branches grow, its roots go deep to get water, its leaves grow. In fact, if you have a plant in a dark room with a window with light, that plant will eventually start growing towards the light. That is movement. So all living things must move. And what do we call the movement of the entire body from one place to another? That's right, locomotion. All right? So we have covered 4 characteristics of living organisms, and there's 3 more to go. All right? So the next characteristic which we're going to look at is irritability. Now, irritability is simply the ability to detect changes in the environment and to respond to them. Irritability. Question. Let's say you're just gazing into the open, just looking at whatever, and you place your hand on a hot surface. You immediately remove your hand. Now, the hot surface is called a stimulus, right? Now, that stimulus is going to prompt a response from you. It's hot, so you move your hand. The movement of your hand is called the response to the stimulus, all right? And that's what all living things do. We all have the ability as living organisms to respond to changes in our environment. For example, if you go somewhere and it's very, very cold, you start to shiver. That's your body responding to the cold. With the analogy with the plant, if it's in a dark room and there's a lit window, the plant will respond to the stimulus, which is light, and start to grow towards the light. Irritability is the ability to respond or detect changes in the environment and respond to these changes. And you may see the term sensitivity being used in conjunction with irritability. They can be used interchangeably. So question, what changes can you detect in your environment? Think of your 5 senses. As humans, we are able to detect light, sound, chemicals in the air, which we can smell, chemicals in our food that we can taste, and we can also detect pressure or touch, right? So when you think of irritability, think about our 5 senses and what they're able to detect, all right? So in recapping, irritability, which is also called sensitivity, is the ability to detect changes in the environment. And in detecting these changes, we can respond to them, or we respond to them. All right, so the next characteristic which we're going to look at is excretion. Now, what is excretion? Well, there's a hint with the prefix X, which means out. So excretion is the removal of waste from the body. Now, hold on. Excretion is the removal of waste from the body. Now, not all wastes are considered to be excretion. Excretion is only concerned with the removal of waste caused by metabolism or a chemical reaction in the body. So, when you eat food and food is undigested and you expel that, that is not excretion. In fact, that's called elimination or egestion. Excretion is the removal of waste from the body that is caused by metabolism or chemical reactions. All right, so when we exhale, this is excretion. When we sweat, This is excretion. When we urinate, this is excretion, but not when we defecate, which is called egestion or elimination, right? So let's recap or backtrack. Excretion is removal of waste from the body caused by metabolism, all right? So excretion is removal of waste from the body that is caused by metabolism, all right? And the last characteristic which all living organisms must display is reproduction. Now, what is reproduction? Now, reproduction in its simplest form is making new individuals like yourself. So, humans will reproduce and make babies, which will grow to be adult, male or female. Dogs will reproduce and make puppies, which will eventually grow up to be dogs. Plants will also reproduce and make new plants like itself or like themselves. So reproduction is simply the making of new individuals like the original. All right? Now, there are two types of reproduction. There's sexual reproduction, where the male cell fused with the female cell, the male cell being the sperm cell, and the female cell being the egg. They fuse and an embryo is formed. So that is reproduction, sexual reproduction. Asexual reproduction is basically when a cell divides and then we have a copy of the original cell, basically. So let's recap. Reproduction is the making of new individuals like the original or like itself. And there are two types of reproduction. There's sexual reproduction and asexual reproduction. So there you have it. All living organisms must display 7 characteristics. These are nutrition, respiration, growth, movement, irritability, sometimes called sensitivity, excretion, and reproduction. And there's a simple way of remembering these 7 functions. We can use the acronym Mrs. Gren. All right, where M stands for movement, R stands for respiration, S is going to stand for sensitivity, which is the same as irritability. G will stand for growth. R stands for reproduction. E stands for excretion. And N, you guessed it, nutrition. Now let's do a quick recap. Everything in our environment can be placed into 2 groups: living organisms or a non-living thing. All living organisms must display 7 characteristics. These are nutrition, respiration, growth, movement, irritability or sensitivity, excretion, and reproduction. And we can always remember these 7 characteristics by thinking about Mrs. Gren. M for movement, R for respiration, S for sensitivity, G for growth, R for reproduction, E for excretion, and N for nutrition. All right? I hope you learned something. All right, guys?